All right. Well, thank you, Sophie, for your introduction. I am Alan Ohashi, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Pedro Silva. We're, uh, we're recording episode 2 of our Black and Tan podcast, Closing Social Divides One Beer at a Time. After last week's episode, I was wondering why stout beer floats on the top of pale ale. And I would have thought that because Guinness is a lot heavier, that would sink to the bottom. And you're a stout drinker, and so I don't know if that ever crossed your mind, but I found
It
out that,
crossed my mind. I saw when I looked and I thought about it, and I thought, I thought the same thought that it's interesting, but I didn't look at the science behind it. I just assumed a few things that one could assume in terms of like whether I don't know if there's something like I don't know because I'm not a beerologist, but I'm wondering if there's something in stouts, some kind of component to stouts, either how it's roasted or whatever the case may be, that releases some kind of oils or something like that, that then makes it just sit on top of the lighter beers. But that was just more of me making something up. I have no idea, but I definitely thought it was interesting.
well, I looked it up and I found out that the reason that stouts that float, that's because of the nitrogen that gets infused into the beer.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And so I guess I'm not sure even why nitrogen is used, but I assume that it's to pressurize bottles or to pressurize the kegs so that it
Hmm.
draws out. But
Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask a beer
I'm
expert.
just, I'm just a consumer, so I don't really know the exactly.
Right.
One of our one of our podcast listeners will tune in and give us the proper definition or the proper reason for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, today, episode 2, we're going to be talking about active listening. And I
Mhm.
was thinking back at actually a beer story about my maternal grandfather, Sakata. He always attributed his long life, which was 103 years, to drinking
Wow.
old granddad and a Coors beer for dinner. And he also used to crack an egg into his beer. And
What?
I don't know exactly why that happened, but he always put an egg in his beer, and of course there's that old phrase, "What do you want? You want an egg? You want an egg in your beer?" As if it's some kind of one upping the good thing that you might have and just adding something else to that. Like if you want a raise, your boss might say, "Oh, so you want an egg in your beer?" But
Never heard that in my whole life.
but anyway, he put an egg in his beer, and I don't know if he ever rubbed my face in it figuratively, but I remember one time talking about listening when I graduated from high school and got ready to go off to college. He wrote me a check for $1,000, and back then that was quite a bit of money. It still is.
Yeah, it's like a million.
Like a million at the time. It was like a million. And he gave me this lecture about him giving me this money and his expectations. But the only problem was is he gave me the lecture for lasted 10 or 15 minutes in Japanese. Of course, I don't speak Japanese at all. And so I was kind of being polite and nodding and going along with it. But then my grandmother, who was sitting there, tapped him on the shoulder and said, Alan doesn't speak Japanese. Can you repeat that in English? And certainly he redid the talk in English, which was, about studying hard and being a good student and not putting the family's name at shame and that sort of stuff. And I realized after thinking about it for this podcast, well, listening is a skill that we have, but how do we what do we do when someone doesn't understand what we're talking about or vice versa?
Hmm.
So have you had any incidents in your vast vast life out in the community when you've been talking to somebody and just doesn't seem to get in?
I mean, I'm sure that much of what I say doesn't get in. because I've had times where I've, preached or given shared a poem or something like that, and someone would thank me afterwards, and then when they would say back to me didn't match what I was talking about. And there used to be a time where I would just go, "Oh, that's not what I was talking about," and I'd have like, some extensive explanation to help them understand what I was saying. But I had this one incident where I did a poem, and it was about light and dark, just like the phenomena of light and dark. And this guy, for some reason or the other, he interpreted the poem as me trying to tell the story of a white man that was in love with a black woman. And I don't know where he got that from, except for he was in a relationship with a black woman, because he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Man, that poem was amazing." He's like, "You really captured the essence of a white man being in love with a black woman so perfectly." And I was like, at the time, I was married to a black woman, so I had no experience of an interracial relationship. So I definitely was not talking about that, but that's what he thought I was talking about. And I was gonna bust his bubble, but then I said, you know what? He heard what he needed to hear. I'm just gonna let him have it. And then after I had that experience, I basically have done that with most people. If they show me that they heard something they felt like they needed to hear, I just let them have it. And that's happened quite a few times in my life. So, I have had those experiences quite a bit. And I've had instances where, we have a lot of confirmation bias um, in our brains. We show up to situations expecting to hear certain things, or we see certain people and we kind of assume that they're going to express themselves in a certain way. And so we're listening for confirmation. And that happens a tremendous amount. And I know in my particular case, and I'm sure in a lot of people's cases. And while I'm on the topic of bias, I'm gonna make a quick plug for the Jewish Community Center in Boulder over on Oreg, off of Arapahoe, has a exhibit right now called "The Bias Inside Us," and it's free and it's running most days of the week. So if a person wants to, a listener wants to go and check that out, and then talk a little bit more about bias and listening and active listening, and they can re-listen to this episode and pair those two together, like black and tan. But
Yeah,
yeah, I've had plenty of experiences.
I've had, I suppose, similar experiences, but it's mostly about people making assumptions and not having like you were saying, not having all the facts or all the information. And I guess that's basically stereotyping. And I, I, I was last time I told about the story about when I was confronted, not really confronted, but had a conversation with a guy standing in front of the urinal in Jackson, Wyoming.
Hmm.
He
Right,
assumed uh, that wondered where I was from, even though I'm four generations in the United States. It's
right.
that idea of being the perpetual immigrant. And and so, I find myself oftentimes just either ignoring comments or conversations that I have or trying to deflect it in some way. And I mentioned you too, we've sort of boiled down our stories down to, certain ones that we tell about those kinds of instances. And
Hmm.
I'm, I, I'm often just kind of stuck when I talk to someone. I like my grandfather, it's like talking to people in a different language. And,
Hmm.
being from Wyoming, which is, I think the highest percentage of Republicans in the country. When I go up there, I still have contacts. I still know a whole bunch of people all over the state, and I make it a point not to talk about politics, talk about
Hmm.
anything else but politics. And so I'm thinking that what maybe you've done some work with this. What are some techniques about how we can find common ground with people who, you know, have divergent perspectives on things. Um, I know in living room conversations, which we both have participated as facilitators and as volunteers, maybe you can frame it in terms of some tactics that could be used.
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to engage people if you are open to being shifting within yourself. So I think you have to first be open to hear people in certain ways so that then you can be heard. And that's kind of the way you have to set up that reciprocity framework. Because a lot of people come into situations with their armor on, and they're not going to take their armor off unless you take your armor off first, which is an interesting and vulnerable place to be. Um, as it pertains to living room conversations, I think with that particular tool, because no one's trying to convince anyone of anything, and it's set up with a structure where people have conversational agreements and then they have almost like a script in terms of what they're going to talk about, and it's outlined with time and things like that. It just gives people an opportunity to express themselves and to be able to sit with people expressing different ideas on maybe on the same topic. And so that's one tool, I think, to go deeper with a person in a transformative way, which living room conversations can lend to that if the people go deep, if they choose to. But one of the things that I do when the situation calls for it is if I assume positive intent with the person unless they demonstrate some hostile intent. And so when I'm assuming positive intent, then I will then give certain liberties and say, okay, well, if they said a word that maybe sounds like they don't get me, I will ask for just some kind of uh, confirmation of what they actually meant. And so, for example, someone says to me, um, like, I don't know, I'm giving a terrible example right now, but when I was a kid, I think I might have mentioned to you that people kept calling me a foreigner, even though I was born in the United States, and I was just like, man, I was born here just like you. Um, but what I would probably do if I had the tools to do it back then was I would ask them more questions, because I think when you ask questions, it unearths things that people may be closing relational gaps by making assumptions. And so, like, if a person says a term I don't like, I'd say, "Oh, hold on for a second. What did you mean by the term blank? Because if I were to use that term, I would mean this." And then I would say, "Is that what you meant when you use that term?" And they can tell me yes or no. And then if they didn't mean that, then I said, okay, well, can you help me understand what you meant? And then to give them the grace of saying, well, the next time we have a conversation, I'll do my best to remember that that's what you mean when you say this. But also, I want you to know this is what I mean when I would say that same thing. And it's almost like a language exchange, because I don't make the assumption that just because people are using the same words, that they speak those language in the same way, because people put different emphasis on things based on emotion, experience, where they grew up in the country, all sorts of factors. And so I just I kind of take those things into consideration when I'm talking with people in certain contexts with assumed positive intent.
But we're both familiar with the co-housing. You formerly lived in a co-housing community,
Yep.
and I
Mm-hmm.
lived in one. And one of the skills, where those are communities where people have agreed to get along and to operate a community as a group and collaborate. And so as a result, there's oftentimes there are conflicts, even among people who you know fairly well. And
Mm-hmm.
there's these nonviolent communication approaches. And for example, we would learn to reframe or to summarize comments that were told to us. And but it seems to me that that technique sort of could lend itself to sort of gaslighting or parroting
Mm-hmm.
back something that I might have heard from you and not quite get it right, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to make it so it was more from my perspective. And so, if how what would you say to someone who was clearly without good intent and was trying to still keep control of the conversation or of the situation?
Yeah, this would be something that would be probably more controversial, because some people think that we have to, if you're a person that tries to, bridge divides or bring people together across differences, they think that it's universal with any person. I don't feel that way. There's certain people that I just won't talk to. I have no preference to speak to them. And if I never talk to them for the rest of my life, hey, good for me and good for them. So if a person is coming at me with intention that is clearly hostile, even if it's passive aggressive, I try to get out of the conversation as soon as I can, and I just, because I don't have a reason to sit there and absorb somebody's toxicity. So I'll just be like, okay, I'll say something to placate them so I can just get away from them. So that would be my first step. If you're backed in a corner and you can't get away for some reason, then I think you have to use different tactics. And, some tactic that I might use if it was a person being a certain way would almost be like an Aikido tactic. But in conversation with Aikido, you kind of like contribute your energy to the direction the person's already going. And so I might exaggerate whatever it is that they said to make it so they can see how ridiculous what they said is. Um, from an embodiment perspective, I think I joked about this, and I don't know if I said it on our last episode, but I know I was in a mall once and a long time ago when I was a teenager, and this older white woman looked at me and started squeezing her purse, like, "Oh, here come, what is he gonna do?" And I was like, "What in the world? This lady thinks I'm gonna take her purse." So what I did is I grabbed my bag and I mirrored exactly what she was doing, and grabbed my bag too, and then I pointed at her and said, "Oh," and started like trying to get away from her. And then everybody's looking at me, and my friend said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "That old white lady over there's trying to steal my stuff." And then I just said it like really loud. And so the lady could see how stupid she was being by making her assumption. And I just did the same thing, but I just took it up another level to to exaggerate it so that she could say, "Hey, hold on, maybe I'm being a little crazy right now." So that was the way and that's what I will do with somebody if they're openly hostile towards me. I'll just go along with them, bump the energy up a little bit more and make it extra ridiculous. And then it makes it either they're not enjoying the conversation or whatever it is they're trying to do. They know like, hey, I know you're playing, you're trying to play with me. So I'm not one of those people who thinks like I know in a spiritual sense that all people in theory can get along. And I know that there's some people who just are not interested, and that's totally fine with me. But so that's what I would tell people, like, exaggerate it, make it be ridiculous or whatever if you are backed in a corner. But if you can get away, you know and only talk to people who demonstrate some capacity for trying to have an actual conversation. And if they still keep coming anyway, it also depends on the relationship. If it's somebody you love and for some reason you want to keep them in your family or your friend group, then you may want to take it to another extreme and tell them your feelings and say, "Hey, when you talk to me like that, it really hurts me. I want us to have better relationship, but I don't see how we can have a relationship when you're doing what you're doing right now. I know you're gaslighting me. I see that you're being passive aggressive. I assume you don't want to be that way and you're trying to protect yourself, but you don't have to protect yourself around me. And I don't want to protect myself around you. But if that's the kind of relationship that you want to have, where we're harming each other by protecting each other, then maybe it's better for us to have some distance so that we can both feel more comfortable in our bodies, because I want that for you and I want that for myself, but that's, depending on the nature of the relationship.
Yeah, that's a good story. And
Yeah.
maybe my story like that is I was at the baseball game in Denver, a baseball game in Denver, and I have my typical uniform is cargo shorts, and maybe I told you the story, but I was a possibility of rain, and I had one of those little fold up umbrellas stuck in one of my cargo pockets, and
Mhm.
I was walking to my seat, and some security guard grabs me by the arm, not just he grabs me hard by the arm
Mhm.
and says, "Come with me." and takes me over to the security office just on the other side of the field, and he, felt proud that he had landed a gangland fish. And then when we got over there, I pulled out my umbrella, and he didn't know what to say. And I didn't really have a snappy answer to that, but I did, with a smile on my face, talk to him about racial profiling, and how he should try to be better, or try to run other scenarios through his head. What other reasons could a person have for carrying around an object in their pocket? Who
Right.
and But those are those sort of in the moment comment,
Hmm.
or but in impossible learning moments for someone. But did it make any impact? And so it just
Yeah.
seems to me that when you have random encounters with people, it's it's um, it's more difficult, as opposed to being in a co-housing situation, or
Right.
in a facilitation with a living room conversations group or whatever, where people can learn from their learn from their actions.
Yeah. Yeah, I have this that incident reminded me of once I was walking down the street and a undercover police officer tried to see if I was a drug dealer, and he was just like, hey man, blah blah. He started trying to talk to me, and I was just like, hey man, I'm headed somewhere, so I really don't want to be in a conversation right now. And he started saying, do you have any weed? Do you have any of this? And I was like, no. And I was like, why are you asking me? Are you asking me because I'm black? And he was like, no, 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 I'm not asking because I'm black. And I said, why? And I said, besides, you're an undercover police officer anyway, so why would I even? You think I'm stupid too? And he was like, I'm not a police officer. And I was like, yes, you are a police officer. I don't know why you guys don't get different cars. And I pointed over to the car, and he was just like, and I was just like, man, just stop talking to me. And then I just walked off. He didn't do anything, but he got all like awkward and nervous.
Well, I suppose we could tell our war stories here, but you know, um, what are we talked a little bit about some little action steps that people could do. Now, it's the divides, particularly over since the election in November on November 6th. It just seems like it's been way more polarized than it's been. This has been going on, at least in my knowledge, or at least in my experience, you know, since I was a little kid, since the 19th.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it seems like, for whatever reason, the polarization has just gotten greater. I don't know if that's because of the information overload that we have, and the quickness that information travels, and the instantaneous information that we're bombarded with. But
yeah.
it seems like it's very frustrating to figure out what would be something that we could do with our personal agency to become better listeners, or use listening as a skill. What do you think?
I mean, in a lot of ways, we live in a just like Elizabeth Wilkinson wrote that book, Caste, and compared it to the caste system in India to what's going on in America. And I think that that's absolutely true. And there are certain functions in our society that a lot of people um, unconsciously believe that other people kind of play those roles. And so when you have this notion that a person is supposed to play a certain role in society, your brain shuts off and you stop thinking about who the person actually is, and you more engage with the role or the idea of the person. And so I think that what's happened isn't so much that there's more polarization, but it's that more people are able to express themselves. People are speaking their voice. Like when a baby's really little, and you can just pick them up and take them wherever you want, and they can't really talk. So you just say, "Oh, they're smiling, they're thinking this," and we make up all kinds of stories, and then the kid starts getting like what they call the terrible twos. I think it's only terrible because the kids are starting to be able to express themselves and say what they really think, and they start being like, you pick them up and they're like, no. And maybe they were thinking that when they were younger, but they just couldn't say it. Or you want them to do this, that, or the other thing. And the more of a voice they have, the more equipped they are to articulate their own particular wants, desires, and needs. That means that the other people have to let go of the ideas that they had in their mind about what the baby was thinking. And I think it's the same thing in our society. There's people who were told, shut up and this and shut up and that. But now we live in a society where more people are saying what they think. And that makes people who had notions of what they thought they were supposed to be or thought they were supposed to think uncomfortable. And it's just, I think that that's what we're witnessing. Is it's not that it's happening more. It's just expressed more. It was internalized. And a lot of things too is a lot of people used to have faith communities. And I think it was Karl Marx who said that the religion is the opioid of the masses. And as people become less religious and spend less time in faith communities and have those simple answers for how life works and what's the future destiny of humanity, I think you have more people who are demanding uh, to be heard and understood now. In the present time, they're not waiting for some pie in the sky like heaven where they can get the rewards from after suffering in this life. People want more from their earthly experience as well. And that because they're less religious, there's not containers for them to express like their emotions and all the other things that they used to have. Church was a place you did it, or the synagogue or the mosque. And now people are doing it everywhere, but it's the energy is just being expressed differently. That's what I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're telling your story there that we people talk, but it seems like people just talk to themselves or talk to people who are like them or you know preaching to one another's choirs. And you know, it, I know you and I both, we try to get out and be intentional about maybe meeting and talking to people who are unlike ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem to be reciprocal. And I'm thinking that somehow we have to try to figure out how to make it so that when I talk or talk to the security guard at the ballpark, or you talk to the lady in the shopping mall, how we can better use those experiences, because it's really the only person that we have any control over is ourselves. And
Right.
and maybe we don't have wins every single time. Maybe the lady in the shopping mall went home and had some aha moment, and maybe the security guard, I keep hoping, thought twice the next time he
Right.
saw somebody. So I guess that's maybe the only thing that we can do is just do what we can and be as effective as we can just within our own environment.
Yeah, I mean, all we can do is plant seeds ultimately. And then there's an analogy in the Bible of like one person plants the seed, another person waters it. And it says God gives the increase, or you could say that it increases in some unknown way if you're not a God person. But I think that that's the most that we can do. Maybe we're a person, maybe we till the soil, but there's no real way of knowing. But I think that ultimately you have to be true to yourself, because at the end of the day, you have to look yourself in the mirror and look and say, I did the best I can do is I think the greatest reward. And that's what I kind of aim for. Is not a hot, super big accomplishment as far as the world is concerned. But I feel like I need to be able to look in the mirror and say I did the best. If I had an opportunity to you know I've made mistakes. I used to think, because of the way I was raised religiously, I used to think everybody, I don't know if I truly thought it, but I definitely was taught it and accepted it, that everyone who didn't believe what we believed was going to burn in the eternal lake of fire, you know and and I got to a point where I just stopped giving that energy to that thought, because I live on Earth now, and I decided that I needed to spend more time focusing on being the most loving person I can be, the most honest person I can be, and the afterlife life will take care of itself. The afterlife doesn't need my input if there is one. And so I just like stopped focusing on that. And by not focusing on that and focusing more on my present relationships, I got to meet people from communities that I might have not even been able to hear if I was trying to save them from hell or something. So it's just like really is so I had to give that kind of grace in my own mind for other people to a degree, long as they're not trying to endanger me. I'm going to give them that grace because, I mean, from some people's perspective, even though by what I would call grace, I wasn't like an a-hole when I was proselytizing. I like sincerely just was like, I love you and want you to have a best future ever, and then they were just like, I don't give a crap about your stupid future. But then as like I stopped talking about that, I started feeling more deeper relationships now, so I have to understand some people might have been taught some stuff that distances them from the people that's right in front of them. And it took me time to let go of mine. So I have to also understand other people might have some challenges as well. So that's kind of like how I do. But I also am not going to like put myself in danger or ask other people to be in danger.
As you're talking there, I was thinking about having grown up socialized and having to straddle two worlds, and
Right.
having to speak in the language of I'll call it the dominant culture, the mainstream
Right.
culture, and also be able to step back and be my own culture. And that was, I'm thinking back, in retrospect, I think that's been a very positive thing, uh, living and having to live in two worlds. But at the same time, it's all about, I think, the language. And like, for example, I try, like I mentioned, I have a lot of friends who are GOP 2.0s, and talking to them is a lot different than talking to, say, any blue progressive or
Right.
liberal or woke people. And for
Mm-hmm.
example, I don't ever use the term sustainable when I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking to,
Yeah.
into a conservative person. And I will say efficient. I will call
Mm-hmm.
being efficient as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
sustainable, because
Yeah.
sustainable is one of those things that kind of is
It's that granular, man,
that's a
unfortunately.
woke comment of some kind. Or
Yeah.
then affordable housing. What does that bring up in your mind? Poor people in the ghettos, right?
Yeah.
So I usually talk about lower priced housing or housing for families, and
Mm-hmm.
in terms of of that. Or I never use terms like low student teacher ratios. So what
Mm-hmm.
that means is, oh, unions and unions
Mm-hmm.
unionize. What I always talk about is uh is safe and friendly schools. And
Right.
so it's, or family values is another one that's charged. I use family values
Mm-hmm.
a lot. And when I say that a progressive or a liberal, that what do they
Right.
automatically think about? Thinks
Exactly.
about straight white families and
Right.
that are Presbyterians. But
Yeah.
family values, I'm trying to I'm trying to reclaim that
Mm-hmm.
idiom, because it means families for anybody. So,
Right. Yeah. No, I think that it's important to, as we were saying earlier, that people use language differently. And not everyone, I don't think everyone should be like how we're being. Like, I mean, a lot of the ways we are is because we were grew up in situations and contexts where we developed those skill sets over time. And some people haven't been in the environments to develop those skill sets over time. So I think that um, the outreach has to be, a couple steps removed, but also close enough that the person speaks enough of that person's language for them to be able to understand them, and maybe they may nudge a little bit forward um, in terms of understanding multiple people's perspectives. So it's really complex because I've done some work where we were trying to uh, write different marketing material for people for the left, and then different marketing material for the same event for people for the right, to get them to show up to the same place. And it was a difficult task because we had people from the left and the right talking about like, you can't say this or say this or don't say that and all these other things. And the everyday person is too busy to do that kind of work to have a conversation with people. And we don't teach active listening. We don't teach the different ways that people communicate in schools. We teach this pass fail paradigm of get the right answer or else. And when people have been conditionalized in that way of, using language and putting a value on having the right answer, then when they encounter somebody that has a different answer, they're like, wrong answer. You failed. Get out of my face. And that's how we've been programmed. And it either takes a lot of pain to wrestle with that paradigm, or you have to be lucky enough to have people in your life who at an early age prepared you to have a more expansive way of viewing language as a tool and not as the end all be all of expression. Actually, a funny thing, I've been grieving, not like in a big, deep, guttural sense, but I had a little bit of grief recently because I've been doing some projects where I'm around people who are Spanish speakers. And when I was younger, I actually spoke Spanish pretty decently. And I had leveraged that from the Portuguese and Cape Verdean Creole that I grew up around. And I spent time in Panama. So, and I had a bunch of friends that were Mexican when I lived in Arizona. So I spoke Spanish pretty regularly for a little while in my life. And I was kind of sad that I couldn't catch as much Spanish as I could in the past when I was at some of these events. I was like, oh man, I used to be able to know more of what this meant. So I started checking in with myself about why did I let that language slip? Because it's easy enough to keep it up. And I started digging back deeper into my life. And I just like how your family didn't want to have you speak in Japanese because it was better to assimilate and different things like that. What happened with me is I made a choice. I didn't think about it, but I remember one time my younger brother didn't speak my dad's language, but I did, and my older siblings did. And my dad was talking about how I was lighter skinned than my younger brother, but my other brother didn't understand what he was saying. And I started crying because I understood what my dad was saying. And I felt like, I don't know, shame, but something like shame about it. And I hadn't thought about this for years. And I just thought about it the other day where I was like, I don't even want to understand. And I think the thought I don't even want to understand made me stop. I stopped speaking. I kept speaking English when I was around my dad because I wanted my brother to be able to understand what my dad was saying too. So I tried to force English until I started forgetting the language myself, like on purpose. It's like and then I started thinking about it more, and like because of my name and people making assumptions about my name, whenever I did speak Spanish, it confirmed people's trying to distance me from my blackness, and my strongest identity is being black. But because of my name, whenever people see me speaking Spanish, they just like dump my blackness. So I just started not speaking Spanish too, to, just to just to be blacker, in some kind of way. And I just was meditating on it the other day, and I said, man, that is crazy, but how the brain works and what I did to myself to try to navigate some of these stupid tensions of us just not listening to each other and not being able to hear different people's experiences and stuff. So that's been interesting. So I've been trying to get bump my Spanish back up again and just deal with it. But I don't know, that's a little bit of a tangent, but language really, really, really impacts so much of how we experience ourselves and others. It can't be underestimated.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. And I'm always trying to figure out some simple thing that people can do, some action people can take. And
Mhm.
so, just after as we've been talking here over the last half an hour or so, I'm thinking that one thing people could do would be to, if you're sitting next to when you go to church and you usually sit in the same place all the time, sit someplace else and talk to some
Mhm.
different people who you might not have known from before. Or if you go to coffee at the same place all the time with the same people. What about if you would invite somebody new to come with you, or just go out with somebody who you've been wanting to talk to but haven't in a long time, get to meet some people and get to know them a little bit better. When you have those sort of close conversations, I think that's where your intentional listening can come into play. So do you got any quick
Final
solvency?
thoughts? Yeah, I would say there's this concept I learned a long time ago called listening into being. And basically, what you do is when a person is talking, you experience them as bringing themselves into the world. And so, as a listener, you're almost like a doula in welcoming that person into your world by listening to them. And so, when you listen to them into being, you're just allowing them to show up until they're finally into the present moment. Because some people, it takes them a while to get here because they're bringing so much baggage that when you get into an encounter, they have to get a bunch of stuff out before they actually feel safe enough to actually be here. A lot of times they're like in their head somewhere or dealing with some other stuff. So if you find yourself in the energetic position to be able to listen someone into being, then I would say give them that. And a tool that you can do, it's hard to model it when you're on, a podcast or something, but sometimes just waiting like 5, 6, 7 seconds, 10 seconds before you respond to the person, or it's something that I'll do with some people. And I might say to them, hey, I'm going to take a moment if it's all right with you. I'm processing what you're saying. Can I just take a moment before I respond? So that because they don't want to, it helps break up the awkward silence. And then you can be able to, they'll know you're coming back thoughtfully. So you can do that kind of tool and then say, correct me if I'm wrong. But what I understood you saying was this, is that what you meant? Again, with the questions. And also, relationship means a lot when you're doing that kind of work.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
thanks to everyone who's tuned in to episode 2 of our Black and Tan podcast. We'll be back with episode 3 in a couple of weeks. And I did think of a beer to feature in episode 3, and it's a Modelo
Oh,
Especial.
Modelo. Oh, okay.
And
Yeah. On
we'll
our
talk
final
about,
episode, we should get drunk and then just like slur all over the thing and no one will know what we're saying.
we'll know, yes. Or maybe we'll get those people who were trying to get to pay closer attention to us. So
Yeah.
model,
Awesome.
model bad behavior or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, Pedro.
Thanks, man.
So we can turn this thing off.